Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com with the crooked glasses here. Here to talk to you about the best, if I can get this straight, the best, well, hopefully the best cycle of Schubert symphonies. Now, this has been a real challenge for a lot of reasons. I'm sitting here, and next to me is a pile containing 16 Schubert symphony cycles. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of Schubert. That's a lot of cycles. I'm kind of shocked, and I haven't even thought about what's in the overflow room. This is just stuff I have sitting around, and ones that I like, that I thought I should keep because I like them and I'll actually listen to them. But does anyone have time to listen to 16 of them? I don't think so. It's really kind of nutty. But the reason that assembling a talk on Schubert symphony cycles has been so challenging is essentially, threefold. Let's see if I can do three of the three folds. Fold number one, a lot of them are really, really good. It's very difficult to choose between them. And they've just, a lot of musicians have done excellent work in Schubert, and nobody pays much attention to it. And second of all, the Schubert symphonies come in sort of two phases. There's numbers 1 through 6, and then there's the unfinished and the great, which are either numbers 8 and 9 or numbers 7 and 8, depending on which numbering you use. I'm sticking with 8 and 9. I don't care what anyone says about it because that's the way I learned it, and I'm sticking with it. But the bottom line is nobody much cares about numbers 1 through 6, aside possibly from number 5 or maybe 4th, which is, subtitled The Tragic, even though it's not terribly tragic. It's very, very difficult to put together a Schubert cycle that is equally strong all the way through. Although a surprising number of people have done it. But you don't think about it that way. And the reason we don't think about it that way is the third fold. And the third fold is, very simply, that the best performances of the unfinished and the ninth, the great C major symphony, are not in any of these boxes. They just aren't. I mean, I did a talk on the unfinished. I did a talk on the ninth. I mean, the great unfinished. There's the Joachim Boston, which I think is the great version of number 8, the unfinished. And then for the great C major, there's a whole raft of them, including Zell and Munch and those guys. And they're not in any boxes because they never made complete cycles. So it's really, really shocking to try and realize that when I pull out one of these cycles, which I think they're marvelous, that my favorite performances of the two most important symphonies are not in any of them. Incredible. But that's the way it is. And you may feel differently, but that's what makes this such a curious experience. So let's just sit down and calmly go through the stack. Now, the one thing we need to keep in mind in considering these, as I've said, is that the reason people tend not to care about anything other than 8 and 9 is that 8 and 9 are late Schubert. They are big, romantic, ambitious works. All of the earlier ones were written for private performance. I mean, the idea that you're going to have like an orchestra together for a private performance of a symphony is, especially since Schubert was like just a school teacher. It's amazing that he wrote them at all, these early symphonies. And you can't really imagine the circumstances of performance because they were never played publicly, at least for the most part. Maybe I'm wrong about one or two of them, but essentially they were not played publicly. And in fact, he never heard the 8th and the 9th either. He hasn't heard any of them. But the stylistic disparity between the early ones and the late ones is huge. It's absolutely huge. And so you need conductors who are equally comfortable in these sort of classical, conservative style of the early symphonies, and then who have just amazing flights of fantasy and imagination in the later works. And that's a real challenge for a conductor. It's also a real challenge for the players. It explains why there are so few successful period instrument performances of Schubert's symphonies also, because the last two don't work nearly as well on period instruments as the first six. They just don't, because they're written in really a totally different style. And it's not even one where you can talk about so much common practice style. It's just Schubert. It's just Schubert doing Schubert. It's timelessly Schubertian. So let's get to it and see how these all shake out, shall we? First of all, let's see. We've got this sucker. Okay, this is on Brilliant Classics. This is a hybrid cycle, and I've talked about this before. That Brilliant Classics likes this kind of cover. Their other Schubert cycle also has like the mountain thing, you'll see. So don't get your mountains mixed up. This one is the early symphonies are with Roy Goodman and the Hanover Band, symphonies 1 through 4, and they absolutely suck. And symphonies 5 through 9 are with Sándor Vég and the Camerata Salzburg, and they're fabulous. So you can't really recommend it as a cycle. The Sándor Vég bits were available separately on Capriccio, and maybe you can still find them that way, so you can avoid Roy Goodman and the Hanover Band. You know, they meant well. They really did. But the Hanover Band got together at the very, very early stages of the period instrument music movement when they were intervening in the classical and romantic repertoire. And my God, they did it terribly. The instruments sound terrible. I remember I had an argument with a member of the Hanover Band once, and I said to her, she was a cellist, I said to her, why do you play like that? Do you honestly think anything ever made that noise back in the day? I mean, seriously? I mean, what's in your head in sounding like that? Remember, they did that horrible Beethoven cycle on Nimbus. So if you want the Sándor Vég bits, that's great, but we're talking about complete cycles here. So that's one to avoid. Another one that really surprised me for its strengths and weaknesses was this one with Jonathan Nott and the Bamberg Symphony. This is on Tudor, and it's quite recent. And what surprised me about this one is that he's really very good in the early works, where you wouldn't necessarily expect it, because Nott is like making a reputation as a Mahler guy. But his early Schubert's lovely. It's snappy and lively and fresh. It's very nicely done. But his 8 and 9 are awful. They're flabby and micromanaged and just manipulated around with lots of strange things done to dynamics and dovetailed phrasing. And the scherzo of the 9th is so dull. Oh my God, it's so ponderous. I don't understand what happened. If he played them like the earlier ones, we'd have a cycle here worth reckoning with. But as it stands, no, sorry. Another one that didn't come out as well as I had hoped. Karajan. Herbert von Karajan of the Berlin Phil. Oh, boy, is Schubert not a Karajan-type composer, right? You know, all that heavy, string-heavy, beautiful, luscious string texture. Maybe Schubert didn't know from that. He never even heard most of these things. But beyond that, Karajan supposedly is on record as saying he didn't even like Schubert very much, and I'm not surprised. There is one thing about these. I think these are really, really dull performances for the most part. However, in the ninth, there is one moment that you will not hear done as well anywhere else. In the end of the first movement exposition, when the woodwinds are going la bum bum ba dum bum bum ba dum bum bum ba womp womp womp, with the rest of the strings. Underneath that, the cellos and basses are playing like a drone. They're just going like a drone. It's really wonderful, almost bagpipey. Boy, do they nail it on this performance. It sounds just marvelous. The rest of it, So Karajan is a big disappointment in Schubert. Now we're going to start to get to things that are kind of recommendable for some reasons or others. Maybe what you might call your specialty Schuberts. Neville Marriner. Performance-wise, these are just neat, clean, typical Marriner. They have very little personality. They're not particularly exciting, but they are nicely done. They're musical. They're okay. You know what I mean? But what makes this cycle interesting is that you get all of these completions. You get the 8th Symphony completed. The unfinished is finished. And you get these symphonic fragments that are orchestrated by Brian Newbold, one of which is 37 minutes long. It's a full symphony. There's a symphony where you have the entire melodic line, start to finish, but nothing else. Well, that's been realized, and then there's the Symphony number 10, so-called. That's in here, and there's another symphonic fragment. They're all in here, but you have to put up with Marriner and his blasé way with all the other Schubert symphonies, particularly the 8th and ninth. And the ninth is a total snooze fest. But for those other realizations, some people like this. And this one is on Newton Classics. It's cheap. Yeah, you might be interested. Then, also somewhat faceless, although not bad by any means, is Claudio Abbado. Now, Claudio Abbado has the Chamber Orchestra of Europe. They play marvelously. These are very elegant performances. They really are. They're beautifully turned and well done. I think they're a little bland. I really do. I find them also to be just a bit faceless. Not like Marriner. Marriner gives faceless a new name. But the performances, I think, could be a little bit more exciting, a little bit more characterful, a little bit less, I don't know, what would the word be? Effete, maybe is the word. They could have more guts, a little more muscle, a little more fiber, but they're beautifully done and beautifully played. And Abbado has that conception. He was a generally speaking a modest kind of guy, and he doesn't let his Schubert hang out. The wonderful thing you get here, though, is a first-rate performance of the grand duo for piano for two pianos or piano four hands or lots of pianists and fingers, and it's orchestrated by Joachim. And very well orchestrated by Joachim. It's a wonderful work, which there's very little question that Schubert sort of could not possibly have planned it as a piano duo or meant it to stay as a piano duo. For whatever reason, he wrote it that way. But the piece is relentlessly orchestral in conception, and this is a wonderful realization of it, and it's the best one out there. So for that reason, and all the other symphonies are quite good. There's nothing wrong with them, and at least when Abbado is less than interesting, he's light and graceful, and he keeps things moving. So it's not a bad cycle. It really isn't. Also quite interesting, this is the best period instrument cycle, and that's Bruggen. Now, these are live recordings. I think the sonics are a little dull because of that. Maybe the audience muffles things a little bit, but this is Bruggen. Bruggen was a character. He was kind of like Harnoncourt was a character. He lets the music sort of hang out. He does things. He's really a romantic conductor. We were talking about this, about how crazy it is sometimes to have these romantic, extravagant conductors running Baroque orchestras or period instrument ensembles where they didn't even have conductors, and they're doing all kinds of stuff that would have been completely impossible at the time in question because ensembles just couldn't function that way. They didn't. But so Bruggen, you got to put up with him being a guy with a lot of personality, but better too much than too little. And this is an exciting Schubert cycle. I mean, the ninth is really, the finale is exciting as hell. Really, really surprising. You have to get used to the sound of the instruments. The string sections sound a bit small, but I admire the effort. I really do. And a lot of it's fun to listen to. It really is. So Bruggen is worth considering. Colin Davis with the Staatskapelle Dresden. Next. Okay, Karl Bohm with the Berlin Philharmonic. This is the famous German standard Schubert cycle, and it's a really good one. Let's not kid ourselves. Bohm, of course, was a great Mozartian. He has the Berlin Philharmonic. He plays the early symphonies like big band Haydn or Mozart, and they work beautifully well that way. And he always did terrific 8th and ninth. Now, Boehm's best ninth was the live one that he did, or the radio broadcast with the Staatskapelle Dresden, that was also on Deutsche Grammophon. And this one isn't as exciting as that one, but it's awfully good. I mean, it's really good. And this is a fine Schubert cycle, absolutely first class. Can't say a word against it particularly. Also, in the sort of period instrumenty tradition, Harnoncourt, here he was, but he's with the Concertgebouw, the Amsterdam Concertgebouw. And of course, it's wonderful hearing the Concertgebouw just because it's the Concertgebouw. They're such a great orchestra. And Harnoncourt did some of his best work with them. They had a good rapport. And his Schubert is, well, it's like Bruggen. He's a personality. There are some eccentricities of tempo, some eccentricities of balance. His Ninth Symphony, I think, may have a few too many repeats observed. I'm not a big repeat fan in that symphony anyway, but the playing is marvelous. The performances are lively and full of character, and you could certainly do a lot worse. And the early symphonies are terrific. They really, really are. And I like it. I enjoy it. Okay. Now we have, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more. Oh my goodness. Can you believe it? I still can't get over how many of these things there are. These are my sort of top 7, the ones that I will listen to, by choice, rather than, oh, that's not true. I mean, some of these I listen to things, bits of them, but these are the ones where I think we're getting a little higher up in the all-around enjoyability level. And some of them are real sleepers. They may surprise you. They really may surprise you. One that may well surprise you is Zubin Mehta with the Israel Philharmonic. Now, this was released separately in a little box. It was on Eloquence, and which you can probably still get it. And this is in the Symphonies and Tone Poems Stupid box that I talked about in the 5 stupidest boxes in the universe. Mehta is a great Schubert conductor. Let's just leave it at that. He knows what he's doing. He's got the style. He was trained in Vienna. He loves the music. And I think the reason that this cycle gets so little attention, quite frankly, is bigotry. Plain old bigotry. You're dealing with Mehta, who is, of course, Indian, and you're dealing with the Israel Philharmonic, which is not Viennese, even though half of them are. I mean, originally, the Palestine Symphony, they were all European refugees. And my God, they knew their Schubert, and this orchestra knows it's Schubert. And I think it's a beautiful cycle. And I also think it's one of those sets. I can't prove it, obviously. I don't know for sure. But they play like they had something to prove, that they wanted to show that they really could do it as well as anybody. And by and large, they do. It's a very fine Schubert cycle. It is. Next, back to the Staatskapelle Dresden with Sawallisch. This is a wonderful box, by the way. If you don't have it, this is one of those Italian Decca things. It's called The Art of Wolfgang Sawallisch. You get Brahms' German Requiem and the overtures and Song of Destiny and the Alto Rhapsody and the complete symphonies and the Haydn variations, Haydn's 94, 100, 101, Mendelssohn's Elijah and the complete symphonies, and the Schubert complete symphonies. I mean, that's really quite a nice, attractive summary of Sawallisch's work as a symphonist. And his Schubert with the Staatskapelle Dresden is wonderful. It's beautiful, it's musical, it's sensitive, it's terrifically played and marvelously recorded, and I love it. I just love it. Also, let's see, what's this? Oh my, yeah. This is a real sleeper. I wonder how many of you have this one. I really do. But it's good. It's really good. Peter Maag with the Philharmonia, whatever it is. The Philharmonia Hungarica. This was on Vox. It's now on Membran Music Limited, licensed from Vox. And it's very, very fine. Maag reminds me a bit of Sándor Vég. He's one of those very musical conductors who sort of breathes a certain inner life into a lot of the things that he conducted. And his Schubert has that quality. It really, really does. It's not, the best played necessarily, but it has vigor and it has vitality everywhere, all early, middle, and late. And it's very consistent all the way through. It's really, really good. So, and it's cheap, very cheap. So, and it's in a nice package with a nice box and a nice booklet. So, I think Peter Maag is definitely worth looking into. If you're like a Schubert collector and you're looking for a sort of off the beaten path symphony box, it'll give you a different view of the music than the ones you're used to. Consider Peter Maag. Very, very good. Another sleeper that very few people talk about. Wait a minute, I got to move these a little closer here. Unbelievable, isn't it? Okay, you ready? Is von Kertész with the Vienna Philharmonic. Now, Kertész did a lot with the Vienna Philharmonic. There's a big box, right? And some of it's wonderful and some of it's less so. I have never been a big fan of his Brahms cycle in Vienna. I think that falls a little flat, but his Schubert is lovely. Absolutely lovely. I mean, it's just, I'm looking at it here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you get, let's see, you get the overtures in the Italian style, the overtures to Des Teufels Lustschloss and Fierabras. Pretty cool, huh? Wonderful performances. Vienna Philharmonic, Kertész in his, Dvorak mode, meaning, lots of liveliness, good rhythm, and perky contributions from the woodwinds, beautifully recorded. No one pays attention to this Schubert cycle. It's a shame. It's really quite good. Like I said, a lot of these are good. They're very surprising. But now we come to my top 3. I'm so excited. And this, to me, is the sleeper cycle to end all sleeper cycles. Riccardo Muti with the Vienna Philharmonic. This is a great Schubert cycle, folks. Just great. Absolutely great. You've got the Vienna Philharmonic. Let me see if there's anything else on it here. You get Rosamund, the overture and ballet music. And you get any other overtures and things? No, you don't. But you get all the other symphonies. Yes, here they are. Okay. Let's just be serious. This is on Warner. It's still available. It's falling apart in my hands, so I have to stick it back together. I hate hearing these things rattle. When you shake them and they rattle, and oh God, it's loose. You have to put it back together. This is one of the neuroses of people who still purchase physical product. Anyway, this is, like I said, it's a great Schubert cycle. It is lively, it's exciting, it's disciplined, it's sharp, it's clean, it's passionate where it needs to be passionate. It's unbelievably well played. It's beautifully recorded. Why does no one ever mention this Schubert cycle? I really don't know. I really don't see people don't mention Schubert cycles. I just think it's part of it is the fact that people don't mention Schubert cycles, and part of it is the fact that conductors don't get the same credit for doing great Schubert cycles that they get for doing great, say, Mozart or Beethoven or even Schumann. I don't understand it. Muti did some great work with the Vienna Philharmonic. He did a great Schumann cycle. He did some great late Mozart. Just terrific. And this Schubert cycle is amazingly good. There it is. I keep going like this because, I kept these in my collection because I like them and I listen to them and I think they're really good. But wow, so many cycles, so many performances, and they seem to get so little attention, and no one's paying attention to them. I don't understand it. Well, I do understand it. But I'm not surprised. But wow, when you think about it, when you think about all the talent and time and effort that went into doing these things, and the idea that they're all just sort of gathering dust somewhere, it's very strange. Very, very strange. What an odd world we live in, right? And now we come to my top 2. Even now, you can see I'm hesitating. I look at them, I'm like, oh, is that really what I want to do? Oh, they're both superb. Absolutely superb. First, okay, I'm going to do it in this order. Gunter Wand. This is with Cologne Radio. This is absolutely glorious. Now, Gunter Wand always did a great Schubert 8th and Schubert 9th. His later Schubert 9ths are also among the best of these Schubert 9ths, but this one is terrific. It's absolutely fabulous. And his early Schubert, he was also a wonderful Mozartian, and he would have been a wonderful Haydn conductor. I wish he'd been interested in doing like the London symphonies. That would have been great, because he had that sense of classical poise and balance and musicality. And that's what you need in these early Schubert works. And he makes them sound fabulous. They're played fabulously. They're recorded fabulously. It's absolutely terrific. Terrific. However, okay, I got to pick one. And it's the other mountain one. Here it is. Blomstedt Staatskapelle Dresden. I think, frankly, that Gunter Wand is a bit more interesting as an interpreter. However, I think you got to give points for having the Staatskapelle Dresden, which is, just such a great orchestra, and particularly in this set and playing Schubert, they are a marvel, just a marvel. And Blomstedt is a great Schubert conductor. He re-recorded some of these, remember, in San Francisco. He really has this music in his bones, and they play it as well as it ever can be played. Again, what's interesting about this cycle is, like Gunter Wand, it's its consistency. It's the fact that, from one symphony to another, you could plausibly believe the early works are by the same composer as the late works, and you hear the echo of those earlier works in the later pieces. That the classical origins of Schubert's style. And I think that in order to bring them home as a unified entity, for a composer who had no experience of performance in public, no opportunity to hear his music played, no opportunity to revise it, I mean, that's really something. It's really a musical achievement that Wand and Blomstedt, I think, both carry off extremely well. And they're rather similar as interpreters, in the sense that they're not flashy, they're not egomaniacal, they're sort of humble, incredibly musical, really smart. I mean, brains, intelligent interpreters in ways that always make musical sense. And that's such a rare quality. It really is. And you hear it everywhere in this marvelous Schubert cycle with, the other mountain. There's the other one, just so you can see. I don't want to get you confused here, but hang on, let me dump these. Oh, there it is. Okay, see, here's Blomstedt, and here's the other one. One is sort of green, one is sort of blue, but they're awfully similar. Maybe they're like, the same artist or the same painting. I don't know, maybe someone out there who's into iconography can tell me. Anyway, Blomstedt and the Staatskapelle Dresden is my go-to complete Schubert cycle. But I really recommend very, very strongly that you have a look at the videos on the unfinished and the great symphonies, the 8th and the 9th, because there are so many other fabulous performances of those, completely independent of all the stuff in here. It's really just one of those kind of unique things that you encounter when you deal with Schubert symphonies, that there's sort of two worlds of Schubertdom. There are those conductors who specialize only in playing the late works, or the late works plus Symphony Number 5, for example. But then there's the people who go whole hog. And in some ways they're quite different, because the music itself is liable to very, very different interpretive approaches. The late works can be done totally differently from the early works. And when it's successful, it's marvelous in giving you a sense of Schubert's evolution as a composer, which was tremendous. So keep on listening, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this. Go get your Schubert cycles.